Big fluff.
Hello, world. It's Stephanie Cmar, and I am here to tell you that I know some shit.
Exotica.
Hello again, I'm Joel Murphy.
And I'm Stephanie Cmar.
And this is Stephanie Knows Some Shit,
where we get on the old microphone and we talk about all the things we know some shit about. And let me tell you, I'm a little nervous. We have one of my favorite women in the entire world, a woman who is an advocate, a chef, a writer, a mom. Gail, you do so much more stuff, but those were the four that came first to mind.
I am those things, yeah.
Yeah. Gail Simmons is here today from Top Chef, from Food and Wine, from Canada. She's here to join us.
Also true. Yeah,
Hi.
That's it.
Hi, Gail.
I love talking to you.
It is such a pleasure. Joel and I just talked and we were like, now that we've just started the podcast, we want to have like cool people on, but we're also so new that they have to be people I would trust with my life.
I'm honored.
So you are here. Kristen's been here.
Of course. It's just funny to hear you say you're a little nervous because I'm like, of all people in the world, Steph, you should know that I am all bark and no bite.
Gail, you know, I was actually thinking earlier. You do have a bark, but it's bark.
Yeah.
I would say, so growing up, I love my mother so much more than anything in the entire world. But when I used to do something bad, she used to go into her bedroom and lock the door.
Oh,
and that's your bark. You know what I mean? Your bark isn't the bark where it's like you really fucked up. Your bark is the one where it's like stew. And stew.
Yeah.
And
I let my disappointment be known, but in a very subtle, possibly passive-aggressive way. I don't know. No, that's not true. You rarely disappoint me, Stephanie.
I know. And when I did, I already knew I did, so I was prepared.
No, I know you're a parent, and I feel like I remember with my parents that the worst is the I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. I feel like that was always.
Yeah.
Yes.
I still feel that way. You know, go ahead.
I was going to say a couple times I might have gotten that look from Miss Gail. And
no, maybe. I hope not. I'll tell you this. When I was growing up, my parents are vastly different from each other in the way they express themselves emotionally on all levels. So I grew up in a house with a very loud mother who was a total yeller. And like when she was mad, you always knew, but she was always out with it. You know what I mean? There was no brushing under the carpet. Like, yes, she was communicative, but she was also like loud and like always yelling. And her expression of emotion was just loud. So sometimes I came to understand that when she was loud and yelling, it's not because she's mad. That's just how she expresses emotion. And I think that's, for me, how I am in a lot of ways too. My dad was how you described your mom, in that my dad almost never got mad. He was so even-keeled, so patient, quiet, understated in every way. And then when he was mad, like when he was really mad, you were scared out of your mind. Because when he got really mad, which happened so rarely, it was just a look and you ran for your life. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, you know, that fear, I understand that fear of, you know.
And Gail, so many times on that stage, I did look where to run, but you guys had every door guarded.
Oh yeah, that's
like
true.
It was Alcatraz.
Top Chef is a bit of a cage for animals. No, that's not true. We treat you all with as much respect as we can, and we do, and we have so much respect for you. But we definitely make sure you stay in the game.
Yeah, you know that there's
going to be a
runner. There's not going to be a runner on that show. One time I actually looked and one of the directors had a scooter because these stages are humongous. Yeah. And I was like, if I get on this
Our director of photography gets around on a scooter.
I know, so cute. It's like, if I get on that scooter and I get on the 405, like what could happen?
How far could you go?
Rogue chef in monogrammed Top Chef coat on the highway. But I kid. So kind, so fun. But yeah, just a little bit scary, but I think that's great. Today, so Gail, Joel and I were actually talking before. When we're on the show, and I haven't talked about the show that much on the podcast, but when you're filming Top Chef, we do not have a ton of relation with you. One time we ran into each other in the back parking lot, and I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing I was smoking a cigarette. Okay. I took up smoking because that was the only way I could get away from people. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad and everybody. But I was like, I see Gail and she gets out of this minivan with like an aura of like a beautiful periwinkle coming behind her. And I'm just like ripping a cigarette, just not feeling great about my life. And I literally was like, shit. Like, I wish you guys could see my face right now. I was like, I blew it. And I said something and you made the funniest comment. You were like, girl, if I could be there with you, I would, but I got kids. Yeah. And I was like, touche.
Yeah.
And so, but that was another lifetime ago. But that was really one of our only not televised interactions.
Yeah, for sure. Well, they keep us apart for good reason. And like, as much as I think it takes a while for the chef to get used to, and our audience on Top Chef doesn't necessarily understand just how separate we are. We don't talk to any of the contestants. We don't get to know them. We don't know anything. We have no preconceived notion about them the first time we meet them. I mean, you were a little different. You came back for All Stars and we obviously knew all of them. So we had a slightly different relationship at judges table and at the challenges because we all did have this history together, and you'd all been there before and you were all generally much more relaxed, even though the stakes were higher in a lot of ways.
Right. I totally
agree. We don't spend time together. We pass going to the bathroom, like at our set, if anything, that's it. But for really, I've come to really appreciate it. And I think it is the only way that we, as the people on the other side of that judges table, Tom, Padma, myself, our guest judges, it's the only way that we can keep it fair. And like, I don't want to get to know you because I care about you. You know what I mean? Because I want to be neutral, because I want to remain objective, and for good or bad. I don't want to learn that I love you, but you're a terrible cook. And I don't want to learn that I despise you as a person, but that you're a great cook. And that would also be very compromising. So I just want to stay neutral about you as a person. I just want to know what's on the plate. And that enables all of us to judge as objectively as possible and keep the game respectable and with integrity,
It's interesting, too, because as someone who watches it, and I think you were kind of commenting on this, too, of like, there's always going to be a disconnect because we, as a viewer at home, see so much more than you guys do because we're in the kitchen. We follow that. So like when they come out to present the dishes to you, we've seen everything that happened behind. But if they're selling it properly, you guys have no idea what was happening 5 minutes beforehand.
And that's the exact point, right, Joel? Like, that's where the tension lies. And that's where I think our success has been built on the fact that our audience, when they watch the narrative sewn together, and they become invested in the characters, but they cannot taste any of the food at all. Where we, on the complete other side of the table, we have no investment in the characters. We don't know what went on in the kitchen. We don't know what happened back at the house. We aren't in your 7-hour interview sessions. All we know is what we eat. And so we can express that to the audience to help them understand and to make informed decisions. But, that's where the audience kind of like gets mad at us or agrees with us or disagrees because they have this very personal experience with the chef that we actually don't see at all until we watch the show live with the audience at the same time, many, many months after it's shot. It's sort of like an interesting dynamic that I think that's what keeps it real, right? And authentic.
No, I know what you're saying is right on the money because I have to remind myself watching that I'm not tasting the food. So when I'm mad at you guys that you eliminated someone, I'm like, you ate the food. I didn't.
I get yelled at so much. Yeah. I get yelled at so much, like on social or even in person. People stop me in the street and they're so angry that I eliminated someone because they loved that person. And I appreciate that. I understand that. And they love to tell me how wrong I am because that person did so well the day before. and that person's grandmother just died, and that person made what looks like the most beautiful food. And my answer, as politely as possible, is actually, you know what? You're wrong. And you know how I know that? Because I was there and I ate it. And as much as I love that person too, I can't judge them because of what they made yesterday or what they might make tomorrow. Right. You know, and often also, which is another layer that confuses things, but makes it far more interesting in narrative, is that if sometimes when it's not that close, you know, when someone does mess up, unless it's really totally obvious that they messed up, someone messes up substantially, it doesn't often play out in the final production that you see that they have messed up as much as they did, because if it's really obvious who's going home, people turn the channel before the end of the show, and we want you there. So we are tricky. It is television. It is entertainment. We don't want it to be so obvious. So it's never going to be edited to be so completely obvious, but that also causes a problem with our viewer, because our viewer doesn't understand just how obvious it was to us in the moment that just really wasn't as good as it needed to be. Because remember, we're not judging if a dish is like good or bad in its own right. We're judging it only against the other dishes we tasted. So your dish could be fucking brilliant. And let me assure you, Stephanie has many, many brilliant moments, some of which she won for, one or two of which she ended up going home for. But it wasn't that it wasn't brilliant. It was that someone else was just more brilliant.
Yeah.
Right? That singular day.
You know, I think that that's something that's so interesting, and I just thought about it, was that our presentation of dishes to Top Chef is just as we would do in a restaurant. You do not know what type of day we are having in the restaurant. You don't know who we are. You don't know what we've seen. And it's very, very similar. And it is frustrating. But guys, let me speak a little bit more on what Gail just said. We know when it has gone awry, because it's food. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Food is subjective, but you know when that shit tastes good.
But you're a professional. When it's horrible. Yeah, you know.
So there is no surprise. And I've always said that Top Chef does not mess. It doesn't edit. You know what I mean? Like, I love a desperate housewife or a real housewife, whatever you call it. But like that's got to be edited. Top Chef, I do not feel like it's edited.
Well, that's a different kind of show, right? That's like a follow docudrama. It's not a competition. But to your point, even there are competitions out there that stage things differently. Like we, as you know, from the beginning, and thank goodness for Tom, who's been our North Star for almost going into 20 seasons on this. Like, we eat food when it's hot. We don't sit around under the lights. We don't wait for food. We take it very seriously. We have integrity about it. We make real decisions. If it's bad, it's bad, and you go home. We don't keep people around anymore just because they make a good villain, or, you know, we love them for drama. We really, and our producers really just let us do what we need to do to keep it fair. And I think that's why over the years we have gained such a big following and a trust with our audience, because we tell the truth. We have a real conversation about food, and sometimes it lasts long into the night. But at the end of the day, I've never regretted or felt that I've made a wrong decision, or that I should feel guilty, because I know in my heart of hearts it was different. Like, I never ever regret the decision I make, because we all agree and we make sure we're unanimous and we take it seriously, because we know that these aren't people who are just aspiring to be cooks maybe because they think it would be fun, right? These are professional people whose lives are on the line and whose lives we can change. And I think we've proven that we've changed a lot of lives at this point. Not single-handedly, but we have had a role in changing people's lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of those funny, weird things. And I guess that leads me to ask, prior to Top Chef, and I truly, Gail, I did not get on your Wikipedia, though I'm sure I've been on it 90,000 times.
No, don't go there. It's not all factual. Wikipedia is not a fact source for all of you millennials and under who think that that's a good place to do your fact checking. Wikipedia is not all factual. It is written by anyone who pleases.
What you're telling me is I'm a genius for not looking on there, and that this question is perfect. I'm just getting comfortable.
Get it from the horse's mouth.
I'm putting my legs up.
Let's for sure. Do what you want. No rules.
Okay, so how the heck did you stumble, or what made you a chef? Like, how'd you become this food writer? Food and wine to me, Gail, I have 8 binders of Food and Wine in my bedroom right now, going back to 2000. Like, you don't understand. Like,
I was there for a lot of that.
I'm going to read every single one. My love of food imagery, food writing, the actual feeling of having something that I'm so obsessed with in my hands, like being about food and being a book, is just an obsession. So you've obviously done these things to get yourself into a position, if you and I are as similar as it sounds, to make this a big part of your world. So did you go to culinary school? Did you, or did like Food and Wine, you were writing like crime novels and they were like, wow.
No, never wrote a crime novel.
Okay, damn it. Because I do really like those two. I was like, she's written a crime novel.
I know, that'd be amazing. That's next.
I gotta fix your Wikipedia. It says crime novels.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, yeah. Not writing crime novels. No one wants me to write a crime novel. It's always been about food. It was always about food for me from the beginning. Of as far back as I can remember as a college student, really even before that, but I didn't really articulate it until I really kind of was graduating college. And I'll try to make it short because I don't want to be long-winded about it. But I didn't just like pop up on your TV screens as an authority after like going to culinary school and making a TikTok video, because TikTok did not exist for a really long time in my life. But I did all the things because food was really what I loved most and felt most connected to my whole life. My mother was actually a cooking school teacher. She ran a little cooking school out of our home when I was growing up until I was about 10 years old, just for the local neighborhood moms. And this was sort of in the late 70s and 80s. I'm dating myself, but here we go. I'm real old, people.
She's not. She's like 5 years older than I am.
Yeah. When most people were like getting their first microwave, my mom was like, screw that. We're going to cook. We are going to learn how to cook. And she was an amazing cook. She had cooked her whole life. She had never been professionally trained, but she was just a really beautifully spontaneous cook who loved sourcing ingredients and who cared about ingredients and fresh food long before it was sort of like a catchphrase, you know? And so she was always cooking in our house. We had a beautiful kitchen because of it. And there was always people in our home. She was always entertaining. She was always teaching. And then when her school grew too big, she moved it to the local middle school home ec room and taught out of there. And simultaneously was a food writer. She wrote a column in the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's biggest newspaper. Not a restaurant reviewer. She was writing about ingredients, recipes,
cool.
Things like that. Cuisines. Cool. Again, like really ahead of her time looking back. But I never thought that food was anything but what my mom did. Like I took it for granted because when you're little, you don't see how important that is or how much that'll impact you later on in your life. So we ate really well at home. We traveled a lot because both my parents loved to traveled like they would, you know, even from a really small age, my parents just threw us on airplanes and we went to the Middle East and we went to South America and we went to Europe and we did really awesome things. My dad's from South Africa, so we spent a lot of time in sub-Saharan Africa growing up. And so all these things, you know, influence you and you don't really know how to suss that out until you get older. I went to college. I went to McGill. I studied anthropology and Spanish language, which I didn't think would really get me anywhere. But then when I was graduating, I realized I really loved to cook. And in my last year of college, I had started to cook for myself and my roommates because I thought it was fun. And I actually started writing a restaurant review column just on a lark for the college paper, just because I thought it would be cool. And Montreal, where McGill is an incredible eating town. And so I got to it was an excuse to go eat out and try new places. I went home to Toronto when I graduated, had no idea what to do with my life. All my girlfriends, who were super brilliant women, all had plans, you know, like real plans. They were going to medical school or they were going to get an MBA or they had a job at a bank. I don't know. They all felt really focused and set and like had futures, bright futures. And I was like, man, I like to write and I like to eat and I don't really know what to do with that because that's not like a job.
Right. I once
and this is sort of at the
what she was getting her MBA in.
Yeah.
Master of Business.
And Touche.
This was
Right. Exactly.
recently. This was not 20 years ago. This was like within the last time. But please,
That's amazing.
I digress.
But yeah, that's how I felt. I know it's all on point because I really had no idea. I didn't feel like I had any direction. And then I ended up landing a job as an intern at a magazine. And I loved magazines. I read lots of magazines, and I had started really reading food magazines, Food and Wine and Gourmet and Bon Appetit and all those magazines in Canada. And I got a job, the sort of short trajectories, I got a job as an intern at a magazine in Toronto. I loved it. I fell in love with the food writing. I fell in love with the food critic at the magazine. It was like the city magazine, you know, like Boston magazine or Los Angeles magazine or New York magazine. And from there, I went to work for a newspaper and again fell into food. And that's what sort of hit me that was my jam. That was my gig. That was what I wanted to cover. But when you're like 22, 23 years old, you actually don't know anything about food. I just graduated college. I like to write and I like to eat. And that's like, doesn't really make you an expert. And I got some really good advice from an editor who was like, why don't you go learn how to cook? Because then you'll actually speak the language of the kitchen and you'll have a clue what you're talking about. And then maybe you can write with a little bit of authority. And he was right, because I really didn't know anything about food.
Yeah.
So that's when I quit the newspaper and I moved to New York City and I enrolled in culinary school and learned how to cook. And I was there for a year. I was at what is now the Institute of Culinary Education. And I did, you know, a 1-year program or whatever it was, 8-month program. And then I had to do an externship. And I thought I would go to Gourmet magazine and I'd like go be a food writer. And then my dreams would be realized and I could go back to Canada and like be a big fish in a small pond. And they said, actually, that would be stupid. You shouldn't go to a magazine. You should go to a kitchen and you should actually get some practical experience, because just because you've gone to culinary school, you still don't know how to cook, which was very humbling, because as you probably know, Steph, everyone who comes out of culinary school thinks they're a chef.
I was brilliant.
You are not. You are not. I'm still not, by the way.
A fucking fiasco, but do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm like 24 maybe. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll go briefly to kitchens. And I went and cooked in 2 big kitchens in New York over the course of several months and got my like ass handed to me.
Yep.
Lightly. It was really hard work. I chose specifically really big, ambitious kitchens. Could have chosen
something
gentler kitchens. Not even simple so much as like better culture, which we now recognize. But at the time, you thought that going to a kitchen that had a really toxic culture and that was really big and really fancy and had a lot of stars was the better place to cook. I didn't understand.
I still struggle to get rid of my connotation with that, you know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was invaluable, and worked online, cooked a lot. And then
that was my question. What station?
Sure.
Like what were you?
Yeah. So I was at Le Cirque 2000 and
that was big time.
It was really big at the time. It was 4-star. I was on the hot app, pasta, risotto station. I wasn't there that long. The next kitchen I went to was Vong, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was Jean-Georges Von Grifton's like Thai fusion, what they called it back then. Beautiful restaurant. Vong was a spectacular restaurant with ingredients like I had never seen before. It was such a like trailblazing restaurant. And that was a smaller kitchen and a nicer kitchen. Mm-hmm. And I was there for a long time. I started in garde manger, and I did garde manger. I did dessert, because it was beside garde manger sometimes when the dessert guy wasn't around.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we all did. That's kind of what you do. Mm-hmm. And then I moved on. I moved up. I worked fish for a little bit. I started on the meat station, and then an opportunity came up to go back into food writing. And it was sort of the chance of a lifetime to go work for, because I always knew that was what I wanted to do, right? I was cooking just to really get my skills up so that I would be taken seriously, because I knew I wanted to be a writer.
And you were never tempted, like in all the time that you spent in the kitchens, you never thought about...
I was not.
Oh, okay. You were singularly focused on writing.
Yeah. And it wasn't that I was so singularly focused as much as I saw that the life of a chef, and that's not what I wanted.
Okay. So yeah, actually
and I always loved writing. You know, I did. I wanted to use my brain a little more at that point. only because you realize when you're a young cook that the first like many years of cooking is just kind of executing someone else's vision. It's very manual.
Very repetitive too.
Very repetitive, which is valuable if it's a means to an end, right? If your end goal is to become a chef, you need to do that. And I still needed to do that. And I did that to some extent. But then I landed an interview and got a job working as the assistant to the food critic at Vogue magazine, Jeffrey Steingarten. He's not there anymore, but he was like the most extraordinary food writer ever
in the entire world.
Pretty much.
I have no interest in Vogue whatsoever, but
me neither. I had never picked it up in my life except for to read Jeffrey.
I can say from 1998 to 2003, my parents used to let me take the commuter rail from Swampscott into Boston. And I used to sit at the Starbucks and I used to buy a Vogue and sit there. And I was like, I'm the shit. Trust me. There was a whole look that went with this too. I was like, I'm not.
I bet it's a whole vibe.
You know, like, oh my gosh. But I used to read his food section and like The Man Who Ate Everything and whatever his other book are. Yeah. The story he wrote about Fen is one of the funniest
articles. Iconic. Yeah. Iconic.
In a world where people watch movies,
I think I'm going to watch a movie.
Sometimes they don't like what they see.
I don't like this movie.
But sometimes they look for the silver lining.
Wait a second. I like this part of this movie.
Joel and Andy do that work for you. The Silver Linings Playback.
I like this part of this podcast where they tell me the part of the movie I like.
Every Monday on the Peak Sloth Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Food writing, Gail, I don't think we've even ever glossed over this. Food writing is something, I'm not a great writer, but I absorb and eat the shit out of some food writing. Like I just right now I'm reading a book called 52 Loaves, which is just about a guy who doesn't bake, who spends 52 weeks trying to bake himself a loaf of bread. He's currently at a monastery in like Europe right now. It's very, very good.
Whoa. Okay. That sounds great.
Always
I hear you.
Reading about cooking and food, and Jeffrey Steingarten, like to meet that master, I would.
He set the bar.
He set the bar. He was brilliant.
He really did. And, you know, long form food writing like that, like is very rare these days. But what he was doing, you know, from the early 90s through to like whenever, very recently, was like, it just changed the way people read about food, understood the world for sure. So if you were reading it in 98 to 2003, you were reading my work because I was with him for 2 full years, all of 2000, all of 2001. I left him at Christmas 2001 to go to my next thing.
This makes you an extra celebrity. Like extra
there you go. So if you go back and look at all the pieces written in those 2 years, you'll find funny references to his assistant Gail, who was like lugging chickens up the stairs to his apartment and, you know, measuring the temperature of pizza ovens all over the city of New York and testing different ways to dry age beef, as well as researching pasteurization laws in cheese and measuring the sugar bricks of peaches. Like I did all the crazy things. It was like he opened a world to me. I mean, it's a whole book in itself.
I had no idea. That's
one day.
Cool.
One day.
So cool.
Yeah.
Guys, TV's cool too, but this is cool.
Yeah. Different. Right. It was, and he really like introduced the New York City food scene to me, like introduced me to every chef and restaurateur. And I met everyone from like Alice Waters to Anna Wintour to Pierre Hermé and Danielle Boulou and all these people that would just like call and talk to me and actually have the time of day for me, mostly because they took pity on me for working for Jeffrey because he was so demanding and well known in the industry for being such a difficult person, but such a brilliant person. And they also knew that if you were working for Jeffrey and you lasted more than 6 months, you were probably like had a head on your shoulders and you were worth talking to. Right.
That's so cool.
So I made it 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, I got a job because of that very thing Danielle Ballou offered me a job. It was at a complicated time. It was just after September 11th, and I needed a visa. I was Canadian, and not a lot of people were willing to give like 24-year-old people visas to get jobs. But Danielle Ballou, who is obviously a French chef, was like, you know what, come work for me. I'm opening 3 restaurants in the next 2 years. I have 3 book projects in the works. I have 1 million charities and events, and I have a 1-woman PR and marketing team right now, and she needs help. Just come do this with us. We're going to figure it out. And it was like a sharp left turn from my goal of working at Gourmet Magazine or like being a food writer. It was definitely in the more less traditional thing to do because I was already working for Jeffrey and I thought I was on my way, right? But then Danielle Ballou was like, you should come work for me. And I kind of didn't have a choice because he was going to get me a visa. And also he's Danielle Ballou. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to. You
don't shoot that in the
say no. Yeah. You just have to take the job. And I didn't really care what I was going to do for him because he was so damn charming and handsome and smart and man, can he cook. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do whatever he says I should do. And that's what I did. So I worked for him for 3 years and it was through him. And I did all those things with him. And that was sort of like my MBA in the restaurant world. Cause then I was working for like a business and I was working on like, there were budgets involved and it wasn't just like cooking in a kitchen where you don't see the business around you. Right.
Right.
And he really sort of taught me how to understand the world of restaurants and how to run a restaurant. Even if we're talking about very fancy restaurants, it was still the business.
Break them down, they're still the same.
Getting customers, exactly. Yeah. Paying the bills. And so that was really fascinating. And he's still like the love of my life in the best way. He's like my fairy godfather, you know? Mm-hmm. He really like took me in and his whole team was amazing. And so through him, I came to know the people at Food and Wine magazine. And after 3 years with Danielle, I got a job at Food and Wine, and it was through Food and Wine. I ended up working for Food and Wine for 15 years, but after about a year plus of working at Food and Wine, in what I thought was my dream job at that point, because I'd finally made it. Like there I was finally at a magazine, working in food, working in the food world, at a food magazine in New York, using all those skills I'd learned along the way. And it was then that Bravo came to Food and Wine and said, we have this like weird idea for a show. No one's ever done anything like it before. It's about the real life of chefs. It's going to be a competition show. But we don't know anything about the restaurant world. So teach us about chefs and help us discover talent and give us part of the prize. And if we like one of your editors, we'll put them on the judges panel to represent the magazine. Mm-hmm. And so they sent me for a screen test and I got the job. And that was 2005, end of 2005. And they like flew me to San Francisco and we shot the first season and it was ridiculous and crazy and totally nothing that I'd ever planned on doing in my life. And then I went back to Food and Wine and like went about my business and thought it was like a one and done situation. And that was 20 seasons ago.
So when did it hit you that like, this is your life now? Was there a moment that,
man, not till probably season 5 or 6. Every season, I remember 2 funny things that I tell people all the time. Like I have this one memory after season 3. It was sort of, I was still doing my full-time job at Food and Wine, and this was like my side gig for them. And I went to my boss, who was a publisher, who's an extraordinary woman and mentor in my life. And I went up to her and I was like, I don't know if I can do these 2 things anymore. Like it's becoming more complicated. So if there's a season 4, like we need to sort of figure out which way I'm going to go. Like I have 2 full-time jobs right now. And she looked at me and she was like, season 4? Come on, Gail. Like, don't get ahead of yourself. You know, that's like, you're a little bit, your head's getting a little big there that you think there's going to be a season 4. And she wasn't being like snarky. She really was like, season 4. Girl, like, you know, calm down, go back to your desk. And then so there was a season 4, clearly. And I remember during season 4, Andy Cohen was still our executive producer at the time. Right. He created the show with us and he was on set with us, you know, almost every day for the first several seasons. And he took us out for dinner one night during season 4. And I said to him, like, so how long can this really go for? Like, here we are in season 4. This is crazy. Like, what could be season 6, season 7? And he was like, I don't know, like season 11. And to him, I did the same thing that my publisher had done to me. I like laughed in his face. I'm like, you are preposterous.
And silly show.
Yeah.
Just change.
But you know what? So it was like really right season 4, season 5. when I realized, well, obviously I couldn't do my full-time job at Food and Wine anymore. Mm-hmm. So my job shifted at Food and Wine. I stayed with them until really 2018, 19, but in a very different capacity. Started doing like videos, and I wrote a column, and was kind of their brand ambassador, but I stopped running the department that I was running. I was running the classic in Aspen. And I had a team of people that like had no leader anymore. So we figured out a way for that to make more sense. And I stayed with them for a long time, but it was really probably, then that I realized like, oh, this is my life has changed. Like I had never anticipated it, but my life is going in a totally different direction. And there was great opportunity that came from it. And that's when I got to meet you.
Is there part of you though too that like wonders about the Gail that got to just stay and write? Like it seemed like you were so like that was your goal.
Sure.
Yeah. So
it was my goal, but you know what? I will say this. I wanted to be a writer because when I graduated college, that's what media meant, right? I didn't know about food television. There wasn't food television. I didn't know about like blogs and social media. It wasn't in existence. So the only thing that media meant was like magazines and newspapers and radio, maybe, I don't know, but there wasn't really food radio. I don't know. So there was like some chat rooms. There was maybe some food websites from magazines, but food media meant those things. And food media started very quickly evolving. And Top Chef was very much at those crossroads, that moment when food and pop culture came together. And all of a sudden you could be in media but be about food and be taken seriously about food. And I realized that I could reach a much bigger audience, but that it wasn't one or the other. I still did a lot of writing. I mean, I wrote a column for Food and Wine for years. I wrote 2 books. I've written countless articles, forewords. I've contributed to books. I've written in anthologies. So I've been able, and I still feel like I use my writing skills all the time, and my anthropology skills, my Spanish skills, my marketing skills from working for Danielle. But I have been able to use all of them to evolve in media and not just say, well, I'm not writing, so it's not true media. Like, it's not anymore. That division of what food media is no longer stands, right? It's so many things, and it has expanded so much for the better, I believe, right? So it's also much more democratic at this point because so many more people have voices that weren't being heard before at so many levels. And I do think that Top Chef in a lot of ways was responsible for that, or at least helped to reinforce and expand that, and to like open a lot of people's eyes to the world of food and how diverse it is and how interesting and how you can sort of change the world through the way you eat and the way you cook.
Yeah.
So yeah, it became a bigger thing than just writing,
And I love that. Last week we talked a lot about luck versus hard work. And to me, listening to your story, you could easily go one way or the other, but we talked very specifically in a micro sense of that moment. Like, my lucky moment wasn't going on Top Chef. It wasn't getting my first job, blah, blah, blah. My lucky moment was 16 when my friend Liz got a job at the muffin shop and asked if I wanted one too. And that's like my lucky moment. Yeah. And that contextually for me means everything from there is just more hard work and luck that I put out there. You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
like picking that moment. Do you have a moment that you can look back on and be like, this was like it might have been in the kitchen with your mother when she was making something, or on one of your trips? Or
I think it was on one of my trips. I spent a bunch of summers traveling in between college years and in between high school and college. When I was 18, I went to Israel for a summer. And I worked on a kibbutz, which is sort of a really unique, somewhat controversial community living arrangement in Israel that has changed a lot since I was there. We're talking, let's say 30 years ago, quietly. So, I worked on a kibbutz, which is basically like a communal living farming village, where everybody it was a way that the country farmed what was a very inhospitable land when Israel gained independence in 1946. And so it was like people joined these farming communities, and it didn't matter if you were a doctor or a fruit picker. Everyone contributed. Everyone got the same. I mean, it's a bit of a socialist enterprise, but they all took on then factories and manufacturing and technology. But everyone contributed. You kind of raised your children all together. I'm generalizing, but I just want to set the stage. And you could go and work there, for like, if you were to commit as a tourist, you could go to Israel. I don't know if this is still true. And you could, as long as you committed like a minimum of 6 weeks, let's say it was at the time, I can't remember exactly, of your time to working in the farm, they gave you free room and board. So when I was 18, with my boyfriend at the time, we went to Israel and we found a kibbutz. You get placed through an agency. We went to this kibbutz and you kind of show up and they assign you a job on the farm. And the first job that we were assigned was in the chicken coop, picking eggs. And I spent the first 4 weeks there, picking eggs 5 times a day with thousands of chickens in the chicken farm. And that was grueling and just grotesque and mind blowing and interesting in a lot of ways. And I learned to hate chickens and hate eggs and didn't touch them. But then I learned to love them, respect them, and also eat them to spite the stupid chickens that I hated so much. I always loved eating eggs, but for that reason, eggs are my favorite single ingredient that will ever live. I feel very attached to them. And then I had to leave that job, and the next job they assigned me was in the kitchen. And that was officially my first kitchen job. And again, it's a communal living situation. So everybody, on Saturdays, you ate at your house with your family. But every other day of the week, the entire community ate together 3 meals a day that were cooked communally by the people in the kitchen, in the dining hall, essentially. And so I was assigned the kitchen. There were 600 people on this kibbutz, and I was on the breakfast shift. So I was waking up at 5 in the morning. Breakfast was at 8. And I was making eggs for 600 people.
That's so many eggs.
6 days a week. So many eggs.
So many eggs.
That was the most grueling job. And I did it for several weeks. And at first, my first job actually was dishwashing. Everyone is sent to do dishwashing first. And I dishwashed for a week or two, just 8 hours a day on my feet with my Sony Walkman and my favorite mixtape. And I just listened to music and washed dishes. That was a great experience, although mind numbing. And then I went to cook eggs, and I really learned. I was like a short order cook, essentially. I had a giant flat top, and I just flipped eggs and scrambled eggs and hard-boiled eggs for hours and hours every day. I worked from 5:30 a.m. until probably noon every day, because then you have to clean up the eggs and get ready for lunch service. And that was probably the turning point, because I walked away from it not hating the job and sort of loving the rhythm, loving the adrenaline. And it probably sort of planted the seed that I loved that kind of work.
That's a lucky moment. No, that's the beautiful, that's because it wasn't luck in a traditional sense. That. Oh no.
Really at the time I thought it was very unlucky. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to be stepping in chicken shit. That sounds, I'm so afraid of birds too.
Oh, it was worse than chicken shit, my friend.
I would have seen that kitchen and I would have been like, there is a light. But that is so many.
Yes.
And I have cracked.
Yeah.
The muffin shop, all I did was crack eggs. Not that many.
I bet.
All right. That's beautiful.
That's a lot of eggs.
Wait, before we move on, I got to ask, what was on that mixtape?
Oh, good question.
Oh, let me think, because I confuse it sometimes with the mixtapes I took away with me for the following summer when I went to Australia, and that was also a thing. But I can tell you what was on that mixtape: Rage Against the Machine, Jane's Addiction, a lot of Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Porno for Pyros.
Wow.
I want this mixtape. This sounds great.
You know who I
Smashing Pumpkins.
Love.
Yeah.
I'm just
who I just decided was the man of my dreams, who I didn't know until recently. Chris Cornell.
Who?
Minus all of the bad, but he was
May he rest in peace.
Yes.
Beautiful. God, and his voice,
Beyond.
his live version of Nothing Compares to You, you're just like, David cried one time in the car. It's like, it's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. Sorry, side note, but I really.
He was a god. He was a rock god. He was the most beautiful. His voice. Sad. There's like no one, there's a lot of amazing musicians out there, but Chris Cornell's voice was like singular, you know?
I
could go on about that.
I love this image though of you listening to 90s alternative music with all these eggs. And
that was me.
Yeah.
It's funny to imagine. I had long braids like down to my rib cage, like long hair. I don't know. I'm trying to like jean shorts and like a ripped, possibly tie-dyed t-shirt. I also had a whole, like, I was also really into like the Grateful Dead, and I listened to a lot of like folk, Neil Young. Like I had a big Led Zeppelin phase. But yeah,
it was all real Dead phase right now. It's funny how the Dead comes back.
Tom Colicchio.
They do. Comes back in my life. Do you know when I was in 7th grade, this might be crazy, but my a cappella group, because we had to do a cappella or like some sort of school thing in sports where it's just not my jam. We sang Scarlet Begonias in a cappella.
That's beautiful. I want to hear it. You don't find a recording.
My voice is it's a hidden gem that Kristen and David said should stay a little more hidden. But I digress.
Gotta get some drinks in you and get it out.
Yeah, exactly. And I will fucking belt. Okay, before we go, I had one last question, and I'm going to be completely clear. I listened to a podcast called Your Last Meal with something Bell. Shit, now I can't remember her name. Whatever. It's a phenomenal podcast, but she's got me thinking about last meals. Okay. So rip the morbidity out of here. If you had one last meal just to enjoy, you're just sitting here right now and you're like, God, yes, please. And thank you. Are you making sure that your last meal is not on fire?
No, I'm showing you, if you can see, it's hard to see here, but there's a book on my shelf right there. Is it backwards for you? It says My Last Supper, The Next Course.
Yeah.
By Melanie Dene, who is a good friend of mine. And she wrote 2 books interviewing chefs about their last meals. Anyway, that's the book right
Did
there.
you give a response?
I didn't know her when she wrote the book. We became friends afterwards, which is now about 10, 12 years ago. But she then did a video series with it as well and did interview me for it. But I've thought about this because I have been asked this question, and I take out the morbidity. So important. I want to think about why I know that it's my last meal.
Yeah.
But I always think about what it would be. And if I'm going to like throw caution to the wind, I think that it would be sea urchin pasta to start. Like spaghetti, sea urchins, chilies, olive oil.
Like Eska used to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like full on Palermo, like Sicily, sea urchin pasta. That's all I want. I would have some sort of crazy porterhouse. I'm an omnivore. So some sort of, I would say put some vegetables with it, but what's the point? It's your last meal.
You don't need vegetables if you don't want a vegetable.
But just the porterhouse, on open fire. And then for dessert.
Most important part.
No, I do love dessert. And I think about a couple things.
You make a good dessert too.
You know, people think I'm like really into pastry, and I'm really not.
It's because you did that pastry season.
I hosted Top Chef dessert. Yes. And because I have a sweet tooth, like not more than savory food. I'm not a pastry cook by any means. I can make a decent dessert, like as a savory cook. You know what I mean?
You chef a dessert.
Away. Yeah, I chef a dessert.
You don't pastry a dessert. I'm the same way. We chef a dessert.
That's exactly right. In fact, I wanted to write a cookbook called Chef Desserts at one point, which maybe we will. Maybe I will.
Yes.
Just about all those desserts, like that are.
Can I invite myself to write a guest recipe?
Yeah, you sure can.
Okay. Did you hear that apprehension, Joel? There's apprehension, but I got a yes.
It's recorded though, so it's on the record on the podcast.
There's no apprehension. I would say if I really want to because I'm about to die.
Right. Yeah.
Eat this. What is the most nostalgic, satisfying dessert? And it's really weird and simple. And from a childhood memory, it's butterscotch pudding.
Nothing wrong with that.
butterscotch pudding, maybe some fresh unsweetened whipped cream on top. I don't know, maybe some crunchy, like candied hazelnuts or something just for some crunch. But otherwise, just like butterscotch pudding. Like, it's so texturally satisfying and nutty, scotchy, delicious.
It's not too sweet. It's not, and it has a little bit of salt, but it also has a creaminess. I think that butterscotch pudding in the realm of puddings is a different kind of decadence. Like, banana pudding has a texture. Butterscotch pudding is like, it's a mix, but it's like if you stabilized on glaze, kind of, yeah. But no, right? Because it's like started with caramel, so it's like cooked out. It's cooked sugar, right? That's the start of it. But it coats your tongue in a way that doesn't coat it with fat. Buttery. It's gorgeous, guys.
It's a little bit scorched, so it has that like burnt caramelly flavor.
I enjoy a light burn in my desserts. Like, I enjoy that layer of flavor. All right, cool. Totally. Well, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. I hope we never have to eat that meal together, but
we won't. We won't. And if it's our last meal,
we can eat it together, just not as our last meal.
We'll call it like our last meal before Tuesday. You know, like something a little more optimistic. Awesome. Yep.
Well, I did want to say before we go that not only did you guys make it past 5 seasons, but I saw that you were nominated for a bunch of Emmys once again. So congrats on that.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah. We found out yesterday 6 Emmys for our Houston season, which is not a little thing. Like, I don't feel that's something that I don't take for granted. The fact that we're still in the game, we're still making this show, and that we are still recognized by the Television Academy and our peers for the quality of the show we're making. Like, I feel very, very lucky.
Damn.
I really am proud of the people. And you know these people very well, Steph. Our crew is like a really special group of people that work really hard, and there's a lot of us, and they're awesome. And we've all been together for now
20 seasons. No, I'm just kidding.
Some of us, like the better part of 2 decades, which is unbelievable.
So cool.
And it's still great. I mean, I'm always fascinated by the way that it stays relevant and is reinventing itself. I'm sure you hear this all the time, but you guys do fantastic work, and I love the show.
Thank you. Well, so am I. We push ourselves and our EP, our showrunner, Johnny, and who started on season 1 as a PA. I love to tell people, and now she runs the whole thing. Cool. She pushes us, and so does the network, and we all push each other, I think, and we all question things, and we evolve. And they've allowed us to make a show that like reflects that every moment we're in. You know, we don't shy away from topics because they're scary or they're political. Because food's political. That's just
I was going to say, fuck that.
It brings people together, and
I do want to say that since you mentioned that too as well, I respect that so much of you and the 2 other judges, because I follow you all on social media, and you are all very outspoken, and I really love that you all speak your mind and speak for very righteous causes. So that is a great thing.
We try. I mean, I also am in awe of Tom and Padma for their advocacy work, and I so respect how they put themselves out there. And I feel like we all kind of have this platform, and these days the world is such a trash fire that you don't have a choice. Like, it's too sad, and I can't ignore it, and I can't just pretend that I make whipped cream and foie gras all day, because that's just bullshit.
Agreed. Very much agreed.
Is there anything we have not mentioned that you want to mention before we go?
No, I mean, that's it. We're going into our 20th season, and I'm really excited to start shooting it. I think it's going to be totally different than anything we've done before. We're really trying to go big. So we'll keep you posted.
Perfect, everybody. Well, thank you, Gail. This was like bucket list dreams just all come true in one. I am one day going to write you a list of 50 questions I have about Jeffrey Steingarten. The obsession is so real. You don't know. That's like the thing that really
I believe it. I feel the same.
I'm just obsessed. But this was so wonderful and such a pleasure to have on you. Guys, if you have any questions for Gail, you can always hit us up at Stephanie Knows Some Shit, and we will do our best to get your questions to her. She is an open book and phenomenal. And any question she doesn't want to answer, I'll make up an answer for you.
Totally.
Yeah.
There are a few questions that I won't answer, although they just need to be appropriate and respectful.
Exactly. And I'm not going to answer anything gross, so don't be gross. We appreciate it so much, though, Gail. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All
and
right.
Joel?
Thanks, everybody, for listening. That's going to do it for us. Until next week, goodbye.
And don't forget, everybody, you've got this.
Stephanie Knows Some Shit is hosted by Stephanie Cmar and me, Joel Murphy, and produced by me. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and instead of a review, tell us about a meal that you ate or made recently. We'd love to read about it.
We Have to Ask. It's a podcast where we answer the question, are you going to eat that?
What will you leave behind?
Why get out of bed?
Will you be our neighbor?
I'm Marty.
And I'm Jonathan.
We're two hosts.
Infinite universes.
We have to ask.
New interviews every Tuesday.
Find us on iTunes or online at wehavetoask.com or with the other great podcasts on the Peak Sloth Network at peaksloth.com.